My name is Lisa Ross, though you may know me better as Paper Daisy Creations. And today I'm going to be teaching you how to work a circular cast on. Now, I promised you a lot of challenges in this mountain adventure that we're working, and we're going to jump right into it. In fact, I would consider this the fiddliest part of the whole pattern. And so once you get past these first few rounds, I think you're really going to enjoy everything. So congratulations on taking on this challenge, and let's get started. Now, what we are going to be doing is creating a circle right here. This is the part that we're going to be casting on. And there are a lot of different ways to do it. I'm going to show you the way that I prefer. So the reason we're doing a circular cast on and the reason we're doing this particular one is that that hole in the center can be closed up when we pull on this yarn tail. So we can tighten that up so there becomes no hole right in the center. And so once you get it to this point where we are right now, in this example, you can just tighten that up, use a tapestry needle, and then just weave in the ends along the back here, and you'll have a nice tight closed circle right there. All right. Now I'm going to show you how to do this on DPNs because I feel like it is the easiest to understand. But again, I'm going to give you some tips and help you out along the way. Okay, for this method that I'm going to show you, you're going to need a crochet hook. In fact, if you are a crocheter, I think you're going to find this particular method easier than you expected. Crochet hooks, like knitting needles, come in all different sizes. They're labeled by letters, but also by their millimeter gauge. And you want to find one that has a similar gauge to your DPNs that you're going to be using for your gauge needles. So ideally you will have created a gauge swatch and will know what gauge knitting needles you need. And then you want to find a crochet hook that is similar, or possibly it could be slightly smaller or slightly larger. I have a lot of different options here. I'm actually going to use this one for two reasons. One, it is the right gauge, but also it has this point at the end, and it's going to make it easier for me to slide the stitches off. Now, don't stress out if you don't have one like this. I've also worked it just fine from a needle like this, sliding it right off of this end. And I know some crochet hooks have nice big grips on them. You can slide your stitches off of the hook end. That's just, you know, a little bit fiddlier. What we're basically doing here with this crochet hook, we're going to create what's called a magic circle in crochet, and we're going to create a series of single crochets into that circle. And all you have to do is take your yarn and you're going to loop it over like this. All right, so the tail of the yarn goes around and over here to the right. I'm just going to lay it off to the right. And then my working yarn, you can see, is coming out. It's on the underneath part. And it's important that that working yarn is underneath the tail of our yarn. Okay, so I've got my yarn crossed. I'm going to hold it pinched right there. I've got my yarn held taut coming out the back. This is my working yarn. I'm going to take my crochet hook and go into that hole, and you can see I'm still pinching that place where the yarns have crossed. I go into that circle, I draw up the yarn like this. So I just pulled this yarn through, and now I'm going to cross the yarn behind the crochet hook, and I'm going to pull it through that yarn that I just brought over. All right, so let me show you that one more time, and don't let your circle get twisted on you, because that was my very first stitch. That is actually the first stitch of my cast on. And again, just keep holding that crossed yarn. It becomes easier as you work more stitches. So you go into that circle, you draw up the yarn, you cross the yarn over so that the hook is going to hold on to that, and you're going to pull this through that first loop right here on the needle. So I'm going to pull that through just like I crochet, and I have 2 stitches now. So I've cast on 2 stitches so far, and right now I'm just keeping them all on the crochet hook. And you want to keep them on the gauge part of your crochet hook. That's all the same. That's all the same size. If you go a little bit further down to where it's flatter, that's going to change the gauge of those stitches. So I just keep all these stitches right here. We're going to be casting on a total of 8. So let me show you that again. You're going to go into the circle and pull the yarn up. Then you're going to cross the yarn over and hook it. That hook catches it. And then I usually like kind of twist the hook a little so that I can pull it through the very first stitch. And that is my single crochet. So if you're a crocheter, you know this is a series of single crochets that we've created. So I'm going to keep doing this and I'll explain it. Go into the circle, draw up the yarn, cross the yarn over the hook, and then pull it through. And it might help to use your left hand to kind of hold these stitches. This hand kind of twists the hook, pull that stitch right through. We've got 4 stitches now. I'm going to do it again. I go into the circle, draw up the yarn, cross the yarn over, and pull it through. And now I've got 5 stitches. And I find it helpful to count each time just to make sure that I've got the right number of stitches, that I didn't accidentally pull it through 2 stitches, things like that. So go into the circle, pull up the yarn, cross the yarn over, and pull it through that first stitch. And now I've got 6. Go into the circle, pull up the yarn, cross the yarn over, pull it through, and now I've got 7. I'll do it one more time. To make 8, go into the circle, draw up the yarn, cross the yarn over, and pull the yarn through. And now I have 8 stitches, and I have a giant circle here. Now, again, the magic of this magic circle is that you can just tug on this working yarn and close it up. And I'm not going to close it all the way, but I do want to make it seem like a more manageable circle, and I don't want anything going into that circle right now. So I just went ahead and pulled it through. You can see this is leaving me a very long tail. You really don't need it to be that long, but for the video, I'm going to go ahead and leave that. Okay, so now I need to take these stitches and put them onto double pointed needles. Now, using 4 double pointed needles to hold the stitches, like I did here, that's going to be the easiest way to see what we're doing. Okay, because basically we're going to work the same set of instructions on each needle. So the same set of instructions will be worked 4 times. The hard thing about this is that 4 needles holding all those stitches is very fiddly, and you really only need 3 needles to hold all your stitches. And so what I'm going to do is on my very first needle, I'm going to put 2 sides of stitches. So instead of having these 2 needles showing this nice neat square like I'm demonstrating to you, this needle will go across here. It'll hold twice as many stitches as each of these other 2 sides. And so it's going to create a triangle. And the reason I do that is that it is way easier to work. So this is how I'm going to demonstrate it. Now, if you prefer using 4 needles to hold your stitches, it definitely makes sense to do it that way. It is a little bit more challenging to finagle the needles and to keep things from twisting, especially early on. It's a lot easier once you get it up to this point. But I'm just going to show you my trick for using 3 needles for this technique. Okay, now again, you can be sliding from the hook end if you need to, sliding stitches off, but I don't need to do it that way because I've got this nice tool. It's got a nice pointy end right here that helps me slide those stitches off. And I'm going to be putting 2 stitches on this needle. Now, normally, if you're using 4 needles, you just do 2 stitches on each needle. But remember, for my special trick, I'm going to put twice as many stitches on this needle. And because I'm doing that, I need to use a marker. So I'm going to put this silver marker here, and that's going to designate that this is a separate needle. And that means that when I work my instructions, I'm going to be working this side to the marker and then this side to the end of the needle. All right, I'm going to slide 2 stitches onto the next DPN. Oops. And I'm going to slide 2 more stitches onto the next DPN. Now, as you're doing this, you need to make sure that you're not twisting your circle. It needs to still be a nice complete circle right in the middle. These stitches will have a tendency to twist like this, and you do not want that. So this is the hardest part of probably the entire wrap. And to be honest, it may take you a couple of tries. I know it usually takes me a couple tries before I get this just how I want it. So have patience. You're doing great. Just keep trying. And at the end of this, you'll have a brand new skill. Now, again, that circle doesn't have to be super tight yet. I'm going to pull it a little bit tighter just so that it helps me keep these stitches from going inside of there. And again, just pulling that tail makes it tighter. All right, so now the first round of our pattern, we are going to just knit around. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And you'll see these stitches, these needles, they want to move. And it's even worse when you've got that extra needle. So I'm really glad that I've put more stitches on this first needle just to kind of keep it all straight. Really pay attention to the directionality of your needles. You don't want anything twisting and turning those stitches out of order. You've got to keep them in that order that we put them on. You may have to slide and adjust a little bit. Now, if these loops that you've created are just super duper loose, then you are using too loose of a crochet hook. So you can either tighten up your gauge on the crochet hook you're using by pulling it much tighter, or you can use a smaller crochet hook. And I find that to be the best way to get those loops a little bit tighter. Oh, it looks like this one's split a little bit. Let me just fix that. Okay, let me finish knitting. All right, now I did not mark my beginning of the round, but I'm going to do that right now. Now, when you are using the 3 DPNs setup, like what I've just shown you, I find you actually don't have to mark your beginning of the round because I always start the round with the DPN that has the most stitches. So my round begins at the beginning of this DPN, which is holding those 3 stitches, or sorry, which is holding those 4 stitches. It's holding twice as many as the other 2. All right, so now we are ready to begin the first round of increases. So we're going to be creating make 1 lefts and make 1 rights around the first stitch on each needle. And remember, I've got basically 2 sets of needles here divided by this marker. So I've got this needle and this needle. And so we're going to put a make 1 left right after the first stitch. And then at the very end of the needle, or in this case, the very right before that marker, we're going to do a make one right. So let's work through this together. We're going to start by doing a knit one, and I'm going to place a marker. And this marker is going to designate that stitch as a knit stitch for going forward. It's going to indicate that the make one left, which I'm about to work right now, is going to be right next to it. Okay, so you do your make one left. You're going to knit to the marker or to the end of the needle, depending on how you're doing your setup. And I'm going to work my make one right. Now, if you have 4 DPNs, you are at the end of your needle. If you're working magic loop, you've basically done the same thing as I have right here, in that you've marked it. So I'm going to use that silver marker to designate that I'm on a new needle. So the first stitch is going to be knit. I place my marker. I make one left. I knit to the end of the needle. And I work my make one right. So it is off the edge of the needle that I'm working this make one right. It's the strand between the two needles that I'm picking up and working a make one right. Okay, so my first needle is all set up. I've done all the increases. Now I'm going to do the next needle. So I'm going to be increasing this needle from 2 stitches to 4 stitches. So I'm going to start with my knit one. I place my marker. I'm going to work a make one left. Oh, and this other needle is trying to slide out. Let me just adjust it. I knit one. I work a make one right at the end of this needle so that that strand that I'm picking up is between the 2 needles. So I work that make one right. And that needle is complete. So I'm going to put it on the next needle. Okay, so I'm going to work a knit one. I'm going to place my marker. I'm going to make one left between these 2 stitches. There we go. Okay. Make one left. That is definitely fiddly. I knit this stitch. I'm at the end of the needle, so I work my make one right. All right, and that is what it's going to look like. Now, it doesn't look as pretty when we are only using the 3 needles. It looks really scrunched up. It's hard to tell what's happening. So I'm going to go ahead and put it onto this 4th needle so that you can see what that looks like. And then I'll also show you how to do the magic loop. Okay, so that silver marker is my divide. So I'm going to just take that off and show you what this looks like. All right, 4 needles, each with the exact same patterning worked. And on this upcoming round, we're going to be doing knit stitches on that first stitch, and then the rest of the stitches will be purled. So I'm actually going to put them on as if I'm doing magic loop. Now, if you're doing magic loop or 2 circulars, that's a perfectly fine way to start this. Again, it's going to be harder to see what you're doing because it's squished together, but it will be much easier to work the stitches because it will be significantly less fiddly than double pointed needles. All right, so I need to find the beginning of my round, which is this first needle right here. I'm just going to slip these stitches and the markers as they are onto here. For magic loop, half of your stitches go onto the first needle. So I'm going to mark, this silver marker is marking my, that it's a different needle or a different side of the square. I'm going to slide the next needle onto here. So now half my stitch is on here. If you're doing the 2 circulars technique, again, you can just put this on one of your circulars, and then this next part that I'm going to do will be on the next circular. So since this is magic loop, I'm just going to slide it through. I need to keep all of these stitches and needles straight. So I'm going to slide those stitches onto here. And I'm going to designate this is a change in needle or a change in side of that square. So I'm just going to put that silver marker there to indicate it. And you'll see in the pattern it says knit to marker. And at some point that it will be what you're doing when you're working in the round with a larger needle. But at this point, we have so few stitches that we have to do this small circumference needle planning. All right, so this is how it looks while doing magic loops. So you can see it's all squished together right in the middle. It's hard to see that as a square for sure, or at least the square the way that it's intended to be. But I'll show you how to work those stitches. So this next round that we're doing is going to be knit the first stitch and always, nope, that's my tail. Always make sure you're not using your tail. So you want to always make sure that that first stitch is pulled nice and tight if you're doing magic loop, because these needles are going to want to separate. So I work my knit, slip the marker, I purl to the marker, or if you're doing double points, to your end of your needle. So I slip that marker. This is the knit stitch, slip, and purl. Okay, magic loop means an adjustment on these needles. I'm going to do that. And I'm going to work knit, pull that nice and snug, slip that stitch, purl across to your marker. That marker designates the end of my needle or the end of that side. Knit one and purl to the end of that needle. So it'll say purl to marker in pattern, but it may be the end of your needle depending on what method you're working. All right, and that is how I work the stitches. Again, it's not going to look great, but it is going to be effective. And the more rounds you do, the easier you'll see the patterning become. All right, so this is one that I went ahead and worked. You can see I marked my beginning of the round. I just use a little interlocking clip to just mark your beginning of the round so that it's easy to see. I marked it here so that you could see it. At this point, you can tighten that circle, make it nice and tight. I have a needle, so I can go ahead and thread that yarn on, weave that end in, make it really tight, and then I won't have to tighten it again for the remainder of the pattern. Now you can see this is where the yarn went through. You can kind of see like a star shape right here. And I'm just going to make it extra tight by going through those same stitches again. So, oops. So I'm just going to pull it through, snug it up inside those stitches, just make it extra tight so it doesn't loosen up. You can do it a few times, you can do it as much as you'd like. Don't let your yarn tail get caught on the deep ends. It's also totally fine to just wait until the very end of the pattern to weave this end in. And now I'm just going to weave it through a few of these just to just to keep that tail secure. I'm on the back of the knit. Make sure you do this on the wrong side. You don't want that showing through. You can tell that it's the wrong side because of these furrows you get that are purl stitches on this side and knit stitches on the other side. And let me just clip that. Okay. So now I'm going to show you how you're going to change from the double pointed needles onto a circular needle. Now in the pattern I recommend a needle size of 24 inches, which is pretty large. So you would need to have a lot more stitches on your DPNs before you're able to switch to a 24-inch circumference. However, I don't have that many stitches, but I do have some small circumference circular needles. Like this one's a 9-inch and this one's a 12-inch, and they're my preferred method of knitting when you have at least this many stitches. You can't do it at the very start of the cast on because it's not that small of a circle. But I can do it at this point. Now, if you have a 16-inch circular you'd like to transfer to, or anything in between 9-inch, 12-inch, 16-inch, up to 24-inch, you're going to be able to transfer your stitches at some point, and you'll definitely want to do that, especially as this square gets larger. So I'm at the start, I'm ready to work an increase round, and so I'm just going to be working those stitches onto my circular needle. So I'm going to knit 1 stitch, that's the start. I slip my marker. Here's where I work my make 1 left. I knit to the end of this round. All right, and just as before, at the end of that needle or at the marker, if you've got them all on, if you have all those stitches on one needle, you're going to do your make 1 right. And now here's where I'm going to designate it with one of my silver markers. You don't have to use 2 different markers. I'm really only doing it for the purposes of this video. When I work this myself, I use all the same color marker because it's easy to tell what those markers are indicating, which in this case is just that is the first stitch of the side. So I knit 1, slip my marker, make 1 left, knit to the marker, or knit to the end of the needle and then work your make 1 right. And then here's where I'm going to place my silver marker to indicate that that was the end of that side or the end of the needle. And you'll see in your instructions, everything is written to knit to the marker as if those have already been placed, because they are going to be placed at some point. So just keeping in mind the end of the needle is the same as end of the mark, or is knitting to the marker. There's an imaginary marker in between each set of needles. So I knit 1, slip my marker, make 1 left, I knit to the end of that needle, which in your pattern says knit to marker, and we're going to put that marker in place. So I work my make 1 right here. I place my marker, and you can see how this is looking. It's actually easier, it's probably easier than after I complete this needle for you to see what it's going to look like in the round. So it's going to look like a circle, though you saw we're actually making a square. But on the circular needles, it's definitely going to look like a circle, and you'll have these rays of knit stitches. So those are the stitches that are between the 2 markers that we've created. Those are always going to be knit. And then the increases are worked on each side, each of the outside of those 2 markers. The make 1 right comes right before this metal marker, and the make 1 left comes right after this little yellow marker. So I'm going to work that right now. I'll do my knit one, slip marker, make one left, knit to the end of that needle, or knit to the marker, or knit, in this case, to the end of the round, because we're coming up on that round marker. I work my make one right, and that's the last stitch of this round. Now, you do not need to go by 9-inch circulars. This is for informational purposes only, and because I have a lot of needles, but you can see what it's going to look like, and you'll probably be putting this on when you have either a 16-inch circular or a 24-inch circular, and you can actually, you'll see a much larger circle. Here's my final marker. Now this one, since it is the beginning of the round marker, I could do something special to indicate it's the beginning of the round marker. I'm actually just going to clip my removable stitch marker to it, and then that's just going to indicate that that's the beginning of my round. It'll remind me, it'll hit my fingers when I get there, and I can go ahead and be working the next stitch. All right, again, this is the fiddliest part of the entire wrap. So if you have gotten to this point, you have done it. The rest is going to be so much fun. I really can't wait to show you what's coming. It's going to be a blast. I hope you will check out the Mountain Musings pattern in my Ravelry store or on paperdaisycreations.com. I hope you'll join the knit along fun. And as always, I wish you very happy knitting.